So I'd like to introduce our panel. To my left, you just met Mr. John King. He is President and CEO of the Education Trust. To his left is Mrs. Ayanna Ford. She has many roles, but she is also the Executive Director of the Future Foundation. To her left is Jamila Larson. She is the Executive Director of the Homeless Children's Playtime Project. And to her left is Dr. Catherine Dye. She is a board-certified pediatrician at the Children's National Hospital. And to her left is Ms. Lenice Allen. She is a board-certified independent licensed social worker at Children's Hospital 2. So let me just set the tone for our panel today. They have received the 7 questions that I will be asking them, and they'll have a couple of minutes to answer and respond to those questions. And then at the end, everyone will answer a general question, and then we'll open it up to questions and answers at the end. So I'll start with Mr. King. As President and CEO of the Education Trust, your organization advocates for identifying and closing educational opportunity and achievement gaps for students. Please explain the differences between the achievement gap and opportunity gap.
Thanks. So I would argue that the achievement gap is really a function of opportunity gaps. So the reason we have an achievement gap is because we have these opportunity gaps. They start early. We know that only about 40% of 4-year-olds, for example, are in public pre-K programs. We know that low-income students and students of color are less likely to have access to quality preschool. We know that once students enter the K-12 system, low-income students, students of color disproportionately go to schools that are under-resourced, go to schools where they are less likely to have the most effective, best-prepared teachers. They are more likely to attend schools where they are in concentrated poverty and racially and socioeconomically isolated. We know that our low-income students and students of color are more likely to attend schools where we cannot get access to a well-rounded educational experience, where many of our students are not getting science and social studies in the early grades, music, the arts. But we also know, even though we say we need a STEM-prepared workforce, we know that low-income students and students of color are more likely to go to high schools where you can't even take chemistry or physics or algebra 2. We know that our students, particularly low-income students and students of color, are more likely to be subject to exclusionary discipline. It starts early. African American students are 18% of the kids in pre-K, 48% of the kids suspended from pre-K. We have 1.6 million kids who go to a school where there is a sworn law enforcement officer and no school counselor. Right, so those opportunity gaps then translate into achievement gaps, whether you look at assessments of achievement, you look at who's going on to college, who's graduating from college. Those achievement gaps are a function of opportunity gaps.
Yes, thank you. And the second question is, in your professional opinion, do you believe the opportunity gap relates to adverse childhood experiences? Please explain your understanding.
Yeah, look, there's no question, and this is what I tried to emphasize in the opening, there's no question that kids who've experienced ACEs, who then are going to schools that are under-resourced and inadequately supported, are going to be less well-positioned to succeed academically. There's no question about that. But we have to, again, examine this in the broader context around how issues of race, class, and language work in our society. And so, yes, kids who've experienced ACEs are more likely to be in schools where they're getting less, but there's also an intersection an intersectionality between issues of ACEs, issues of racial and socioeconomic oppression. For example, I talked about mass incarceration. African American men in particular are disproportionately the victims of our system of mass incarceration. There are children that are in schools that are chronically under-resourced, and so we see the consequences for kids. So ultimately, if we're gonna solve the problem of ACEs, we have to tackle it not just as a in-school supports problem, but as a societal challenge. How do we make for a society that does better by our children? And that requires people who have resources to take seriously the education and success of the children of their neighbors, of other people's children, to see that they cannot build walls high enough to separate the fate of their child from the child down the street, down the road, in the next community over, in the city down the road, on the Native American reservation. All of our kids' fates are bound up together.
Yes, thank you. Mrs. Ford, in your work, please briefly define trauma-informed drop-in center for teens and their families in Ward 8.
Certainly. First, it's important before we have a conversation about Ward 8 that I let you know that I'm born and bred in the great Ward 8. I'm from 13th and Mississippi Avenue, Southeast. My grandmother was shot by the peeping Tom sniper when I was 6 weeks old. That's when I was introduced to gun violence. My father was shot 25 times before I was 10, and the first time I met him was in prison. I just named 3 ACEs right there. I'm 31 years old, and I've seen my mother about as many fingers as I have. So trauma starts before you get to school, and it's very important that we're having that conversation, and that much like Mr. King said, trauma is in the community. Ward 8 is the most traumatized community and has been historically for longer than I've been born. Those numbers can be found on the DC government website. I'm happy to provide a link. Subsequently, the children in Ward 8 are the most traumatized children in the city and have been historically for about 20 plus years. That information can be found in DC Action their DC Action Kids snapshot, where they look at every ward and the circumstances of every kid and compare them as well as the status of the United States of America as a whole. So these numbers are true. I'm not making them up for the purposes of shocking you. So as someone from that community who was given opportunities to escape the community and whose own trauma led me to be at Howard University right up the street where that wasn't where I wanted to go, I learned very quickly that there's a difference between opportunity and access, and that east of the river we weren't getting any of it. When I got the opportunity, it is a privilege to know that you are a traumatized person. Once you're introduced to the concepts behind primary, secondary, and tertiary traumatization, you're clear that everyone you engage with is at some level traumatized. So we have a drop-in center that lends itself to making sure that folks are engaging in individual behavior change. So some of our programs allow them to do that. The second part is collectively we're looking to do community change. And then ultimately through our political education, our families are proactively involved and in charge of, have agency of what we do to engage in policy change. So this is no longer an issue that we have to deal with, as we've acknowledged it would not be. I want to name that we've never received $1 from the government, federal or local, and we've existed since 2012 before this became popular. And much of that has to do with the fact that I am a black woman with the name Ayanna Ford from Ward 8. And so when we open our doors every day, I'm looking at people who are me, and I treat them the way in which I needed to be treated. And because that doesn't come with any special sauce, and it's called effectiveness is real, according to Sampson, that's the approach, you can find it in the DPH. The reason that we're able to get along is because trustworthiness and transparency is the second principle of trauma-informed work, as well as the sixth principle being gender, cultural, and historical challenges that have, of course, oppressed the community. So having that knowledge through my lived experiences, as well as engaging with others who do not have that experience, I am being what is not funded in our community, and our youth are being what is not funded in the community. You must allow someone who is traumatized to build from their resilience. Where trauma is, resilience is not too far behind. And so it is very important with the drop-in center that our doors are open. We serve 3 hot meals. from Monday through Friday, 10 to 8 o'clock p.m. We also have a laundry center where the door is closed and private, so you can go in and wash the very clothes you have on your body, and no one would know. There's bags there, book bags, shopping bags, clothing bags, so it's not obvious that you're hungry when you're going through something. We also have a liberation library where you can move your desk. You have a number of books, and some of those books have been self-published through our Right the World Free program. So what our families are doing is healing collectively with the community and really being leaders in the collective community parenting of these youth who are experiencing adverse childhood experiences because there's intergenerational trauma present within the community. And no one is speaking about this on the television on a regular basis. This isn't a conversation on Sesame Street. We're not having this dialogue on Blue's Clues. So they think it's them. It's being internalized. So it looks like low self-esteem. We live in a food desert, so it looks like overeating. I'm an emotional eater myself, and it took me being 30 plus and having access to, those social, emotional, what's the best way to put them, privileges, actually, that exist. Because most programs for adults who want to be well aren't free unless you have Medicaid. And as a cancer survivor, which is also ACE, I can't have Medicaid. So these are the realities of the community I live in. And being able to be a drop-in center with limited funding, she mentioned I had many roles. Food is not covered in most grants. We serve 3 meals a day. I cook those meals. This work is real. This work is hard. I won't be here all day because I have to get back to the youth. I don't get to be on the camera on Good Day DC because I have to speak truth, because truth and transparency is a principle in this work. And sometimes that's not politically correct, so I don't get the invitation. Our youth don't get the invitation to speak for themselves oftentimes. But our youth were able to go to New Mexico and facilitate a workshop, not come as participants. And these youth are from berry farms. So when we have this conversation, we're talking about people we don't talk to. Very much you're hearing from people who have never lived in an impacted community, yet they're paid 6 figures plus to represent an impacted community. And it's disrespectful and it's traumatizing to the people who's actually lived experiences, who stayed to heal their own people. And so I'll leave you with that, but I do want to say the Future Foundation will exist forever because our student leaders who've come and seen that their own healing could lend to someone else's healing are doing things like getting full rides from Rutgers, shout out to Angel Dye, are doing things like leaving Thurgood Marshall where they saw their classmate killed and deciding they won't go to Howard because it's too close to DC, but they will go to VCCU because it's just close enough to get to their younger sibling they're responsible for, but far enough away from the trouble so this young black man can still live. That's my everyday. You'll see me answer my phone because I have parents who I parent with them. Community parenting is all of our responsibility, whether we teach or not. And so yes, we have a drop-in center that's an emotional safe space, but my work is to ensure that our community is an emotional safe space. And those folks who have put themselves in the forefront of ensuring the emotional safety of our community are held responsible and are accountable for those outcomes more so than they are for the grant funding. That's what we do at the Future Foundation.
Yeah. Thank you, Mrs. Ford. Ms. Lawson, please briefly explain in your leadership the experiencing homelessness. Addressing your leadership at Playtime Project, how does your organization prevent adverse childhood experiences?
So we all know that homelessness is the result of a constellation of a variety of problems rooted in chronic poverty and inequities and structural breakdowns in our community. And the end result is that children experiencing homelessness are devoid of opportunities that every child deserves, and that is the simple act of playing. So what we do is we go into shelters and transitional housing programs. We set up child-friendly spaces, and we stock those child-friendly spaces with books and toys, and most importantly, trained volunteers who make a commitment to helping to children to access the therapeutic and educational benefits of play. Can everybody hear me? I don't know if this mic is on. Okay, great. So learning all the research behind ACEs has been incredibly eye-opening to us, and we try to bring that research to bear in the playrooms as much as we can. But what's really been eye-opening for me in doing this work is just how you can go to conferences that talk about the two-generation approach to poverty and all this great stuff about children being our future, but when you look at how the city really treats children in these shelters, they're really invisible. They really do not see children as people, more like luggage to their parents along their homeless journey. So even right now, if you go down to the overflow shelter hotels along New York Avenue, where the majority of children experiencing homelessness live in our city, more than 800 children are living in 3 of the largest hotels right now, in cramped hotel rooms, average length of stay 9 months. There's a sign in the Days Inn that says no playing on the premises. So imagine raising your child in a cramped room for 9 months and feel the constant pressure to not allow your children to play, to squash that developmental mandate that your rambunctious 4-year-old and your toddling 1-year-old and your handful of a 10-year-old has without any space to do so. And when you look at how other special populations have really rallied to make a commitment, like to end veteran homelessness, for example, there's been a real movement around our country that has made a decision. You know, we don't want veterans sleeping in doorways. We want them to be housed. So an enormous amount of money has gone behind that commitment, as well it should. But we don't have that same commitment to children. If you can imagine a hotel becoming a shelter for homeless veterans, don't you think they would be sensitive enough to have signs that wouldn't say no dogs allowed? Because they know veterans might come with therapy dogs. And they might even put a dog park where the swimming pool once was. But here at the shelters, the shelter hotels, they close the swimming pools and they close the fitness centers and they make it a hostile environment for children. So 3 of our 5 sites are shelter hotels because we know that we have to follow the children where they are and really create opportunities for children to work through their own trauma and nurture their resilience. So we have doll houses and costumes and all kinds of toys that you might see in a play therapist's office, but we know our children won't always have that opportunity and can really work through a lot of their stress in our playrooms with the guidance of our volunteers. So that's a little bit what we're trying to do. We have a long ways to go to help our city continue to provide more prevention services and supports to families in crisis.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Larson. And Dr. Dye, in your work, if you could please define human trafficking. And addressing your medical care with trafficked youth, how does your work prevent adverse childhood experiences?
Sure. So I'm a child abuse pediatrician, and I've worked at Children's Hospital now with abused and neglected youth for the past 15 years. And in the course of working with this population of youth, it quickly became obvious that that we were interacting with trafficked youth. And so I'm just going to define that quickly. There's sex trafficking and labor trafficking. Sex trafficking is exchanging sex for anything of value. If the youth is under the age of 18, there does not need to be force, fraud, or coercion. It can also include pornography, as well as sexual performance. And then labor trafficking is forcing someone to work by using physical or psychological tactics or abusing the legal system. I think, so we have built a center at Children's National for trafficked youth. Miss Allen is my partner in this, and we provide comprehensive, ongoing, trauma-informed medical care. The youth who come in are referred from community partners, from government partners, and we provide ongoing mental health assessment and then comprehensive medical care. I think that honestly the most heartbreaking thing in doing this work is that I've been doing this long enough that I see young children who come in and I do their sexual abuse evaluation or I do their maltreatment evaluation. I see them back in a couple of years. Is this better? This one? Okay. So I do their initial sexual abuse evaluation or their initial maltreatment evaluation. I see them back in a couple of years, and I do a sexual assault evaluation. And then I see them again. They know me. They're like, hey, Dr. Dye, what's up? They're back in my office because they're being trafficked. And they haven't gotten the mental health care that they need and deserve. And there are multiple times where, the recommendation has been strongly made to these families and to the system that the investment needs to be made, that they need and deserve trauma-informed intensive mental health care because their sexual abuse and their maltreatment is such a betrayal, and we know it changes the brain. We know that. And they don't get, because of systemic inequities and because of access, they do not get these services that they need and deserve. And it breaks my heart when I see them again in my office. Trafficking itself is an ACE score of like 40, right? I mean, it is repeated sexual assaults. It's neglect. It's physical assaults. It's coercive control. It's like almost like a domestic violence relationship every single day. How do you respond to that? How do you build relationship, or how do you build resilience in response to that? Through our center, we're trying to build trust with this population. We're trying to build a center where they don't have to come in and disclose what's happened to them. That they can come in and get comprehensive medical care, that they feel safe. They can get crisis mental health intervention on the spot if they need it. And we link with mentoring services. We link with, what Mr. King built on before, we try and find their passion, their interests. We try and build their sense of agency. We try and find community mentors and community opportunities for these youth so that they can, they tell me in exam rooms that they feel damaged and they feel dirty. And there's, I can run tests and I can reassure them that they look healthy and normal to me. Their lab tests, everything looks great, but we need to change their self-image and begin to empower them and begin to build their sense of agency and propel them along a series of successes and realize what gifts they have.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, thank you.
Can I add to that? I think that's why mental health services are so important and other supportive services. So finding other services in the community We partner a lot with, like, Courtney's House, for instance. And Courtney's House is in the community, and they can help them with getting them linked to things that they're interested in, but just really making sure that these youth have the other services that they need, that they have someone that they can go to and talk to and lean on for support. And I think that's what we're really trying to do in our department, because oftentimes we can make sure that their bodies are okay, right? But then there's some things that are long lasting if they're not addressed. So, sorry.
No, that's okay. Thank you. So, Ms. Allen, in your work, if you could briefly define child abuse and addressing your crisis and mental health care with abused youth, how does your work prevent adverse childhood experiences?
Sure. Read the definition for child abuse. So child abuse is any act or recent act or failure to act on the part of the parent or caretaker which results in death, serious physical or emotional harm, sexual abuse or exploitation, or an act or failure to act which presents as imminent risk of serious harm. So there's 4 types of abuse: physical abuse, neglect, psychological abuse, and then sexual abuse. So sex trafficking actually falls under, it's a form of sexual abuse. Just a few statistics, because I think it's just important for us all to know that every year over 3 million reports of child abuse are made in the United States. And according to the Children's Bureau in 2017, the annual maltreatment report, the most common type of maltreatment is neglect, followed by physical abuse and sexual abuse. And then 1 out of 10 children experience sexual abuse before their 18th birthday. 90% of children know their abuser. So children are at greater risk of adverse childhood experiences when they keep the abuse a secret or when they're not believed by their family. Once abuse has occurred, both the parent and the child may be in need of some services, whether that's psychoeducation around this is what's happened and this is what we can help you with, or mental health services or other supportive services in the community. So of course, I believe child abuse can be prevented. In my department, as Dr. Dye said, we provide mental health and medical services to children who have either their suspicion that abuse has occurred or the child has actually been abused. So our primary focus is really on secondary and tertiary prevention. But we do offer a training called Stewards of Children. I'm one of the facilitators of that training.